listening to The Doctor's Corner with Dr. Kline and Jonelle Elgaway.
Hello, Con Nation, and hello, Dr. Kline. How are you this evening?
Good evening.
Good evening. Well, welcome to our first show, The Doctor's Corner. If anyone listening has a question or comment, you could call in at 415-915-2291. So what are we going to talk about this evening?
I get a lot of questions about the opioid epidemic, and just on January 17th, the GAO issued a report saying that Medicare really needs to crack down on doctors. Now, the GAO is the government accounting office, which we always think of as kind of a bunch of accountants doing these kinds of financial reviews, who's spending money, who's not spending money. They're the ones who trap crooks who are cheating the government contractors. But they decided to get into the issue of prescription opioids. It's important for everyone to know that opioid is a recently invented word that just means opiate or narcotic, or the appropriate term is pain medicine. The GAO report starts off with misuse of prescription opioids can lead to overdose and death.
Well, is that true, though?
It's not true. This is what is driving the epidemic of pain opioid refugees, people who are not getting treatment because of this concern of overdose and death. The C.D.C. data shows there has been increased overdose deaths, but what they leave off is a very important adjective. It's heroin overdose and death. So it makes it appear that prescribing too many opioids, or narcotics, which are similar to heroin, is causing the problem. And it's not true.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Sorry. So they're saying that basically anybody that has to take opioids, if they have pain, that they are going to overdose or they're going to become an addict.
Exactly. There are groups of people, a group of doctors that was formed about 6 years ago called the P.R.O.P group, Physicians for Responsible Opioid Prescribing. And actually it is P.R.O.P, but it's Physicians for the Reduction of Opiates. They believe that the longer you take an opiate for your long-term pain, the less effective it becomes. And then you can develop addiction, and then you can develop an overdose and die. The problem is they have really not submitted any scientific information to show that that's true.
So did they do they just all come together and just decide this? Like, why would they want to do that?
It's almost a story of that you would read in a novel. And although I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, it was a conspiracy. What happened was, this could be a late-night TV show, the P.R.O.P group that I just mentioned, whose members believe that if you have pain, you can just think about it and deal with it. And if you take medicines, you're going to end up dead and addicted, submitted a petition to the F.D.A. in 2012 that actually anybody can do. And they said, look, with all these dangers of overdose and death from these heroin-like drugs, terms they used, we petitioned the F.D.A. to put a limit on these pain medicines. The F.D.A. scientists looked at this for almost a year, and they came back and said, all of your claims do not hold up. And they denied their petition.
So how is this gaining traction then?
Well, what happened was they did not appeal it, which they could have done. What they did is they snuck over to the C.D.C., which is an agency, you know, that tracks influenza. And under the leadership of Tom Frieden, who was director of the C.D.C. at the time, who also believes that pain medicine was the same as heroin pills, provided cover for P.R.O.P. P.R.O.P. met in secret. They would not release the names of the people on the committee who were drafting these regulations. Congress became involved and sent them a letter, so we want to know what's going on. The Washington Legal Foundation sent them a letter and said, we want to know what's going on. Why are you meeting in secret? This is a public agency. So what they did was they pretty much ignored it and quick published 3 months later their regulations that contain all the falsehoods that were denied by the F.D.A.
Wow.
So we're sort of stuck with a major agency.
Right. And is there any like research on this? Has there been testing at all or long term? Anything?
No. When I asked Dr. Kolodny, who runs the P.R.O.P. group, for evidence, he sent me some articles and I read them, and they did not apply. The articles, for example, the claim is that there's been more addiction with these writing too many prescriptions, and that's not even in the C.D.C. report. There's nothing mentioned about addiction, actually. But he sent me articles that more people who have heroin problems signed up for treatment at treatment clinics as evidence that there's more addicts. That's hardly logical. Maybe they're signing up because they've got better treatment facilities, or there's been some improvements. Also, when there's a good treatment facility, people come from out of town. And so that was the evidence offered, that there was more addiction with this increase of prescriptions.
Well, isn't this also, this is the smallest amount that doctors have ever actually have prescribed opioid prescriptions, and there's the same amount of addictions and overdoses too, right? Or is that incorrect? I'm not really sure about that.
No, the epidemic of overdose, the highest numbers of overdose deaths we've ever had is kind of like, I am the oldest I've ever been. Every year since 1970, overdose deaths have increased. So it's been 40 years. What they're not accounting for is the population growth. Every year there are new addicts, addicted people rather. Addict's a bad word. Remind me not to say that. There are more addicted people every year, as would be with any disease. Right? Every year there's more diabetics. Every year are adding to the list. And so if you look at a graph from 1970, it just kind of steadily goes up every year. But part of that is the failure.
That's why we need more addiction housing too, right? That's why they made more?
Well, we need more treatment for addiction, and there are three components every time there's one of these epidemics. More treatment, more law enforcement, and more money. I reviewed the New York Times articles on addiction in the 1950s, just for the fun of it, and guess what? It sounded exactly the same. What we need is not more treatment for people with addiction disease. We need appropriate treatment. People with addiction disease have a genetic disease. It's triggered by the first time opiates are used. and it is treatable. We doctors treated it back in the turn of the century by giving opiate replacement. People with this weird disease need to have a regulated amount of replacement, much the same as a diabetic needs a regulated amount of insulin.
What do you have to say? Go ahead, I'm so sorry.
No. That's the way.
Yeah, well, Kline says that if you get prescribed oxycodone when you're 18, when you get your wisdom teeth out, and you never have it again, and then 10 years later you're reintroduced to that, you could be immediately addicted. What does he mean by that?
Well, I'm afraid that's a false statement on his part. Opiate addiction is triggered if you have the genes the very first time you do it. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. A physician, emergency room physician, was Muslim. He never had alcohol, which also could trigger this, and he never in his life had any opiate pain medicine. So one day he twists his ankle, and another doctor prescribed Vicodin for him. That was it. He went on the magic carpet ride that happens when you have this genetic malformation of your brain chemistry, and he became a heroin addict.
Well, we've talked about that before, and you said there's this huge difference between somebody that doesn't have that gene and somebody that does, and that they what is this magic carpet ride? So if there's an 18-year-old and say they drink alcohol for the first time, how do you know the difference between that magic carpet ride and just just a regular person just trying alcohol?
That's a very good point, and this is why education is needed. Kids in school, 90% of opiate addiction occurs in high school. Mm-hmm. 90%. Why is that? Because kids are all, stupid? No. Mm-hmm. It's because the kids have never had an opiate for any reason. They've never broken their leg or, been prescribed pain medicine. So the one kid with the genes, it'd be about 4 kids out of 1,000. If you have a high school of 1,000, it'd be about 4 kids with the gene. And so the kid with the gene goes to a party, as kids in high school do, and either drinks or tries an opiate tablet, and all of a sudden this whole world changes. It's like a cosmic experience. It's so difficult to understand that one addicted person I talked to in Portland, Oregon says, honestly, I don't know why everybody doesn't do this. Mm. There's a judge in New York who runs a special addiction court. He himself is an addict. And he said, if you want to say, how wonderful it is for a woman to have a child, or how wonderful it is to go to an exciting basketball game, or how wonderful it is to have sex, he said, I would give those all a rating of 9 on the kind of wonderful scale.
Wow, that's powerful.
This is a judge who's an addict, and he says, now heroin, okay, you got 9 for all those other ones. Heroin would be 1,000.
Wow.
So what we have to do in schools, instead of running around going, here's some pictures of people who are dead, you need to say to kids in school, you may go on a magic carpet ride the first time you try alcohol, or if you try an opiate. It's different than what the other kids will feel. Only people with the genes can experience the high ecstasy of being on opiates. It's like your whole reward system lights up all at once and goes crazy. It's a disease. Yeah. Something is really wrong.
I had a friend that said that they can't imagine life without it. That's all they can think about, and if they don't have it, then life isn't worth living, basically. So it's that.
And that's where the moralists come in. The moralists, starting back in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, where they were hanging their friends for being bewitched, also did not practice any enjoyment. They didn't celebrate birthdays. They didn't celebrate Christmas. They didn't want to have too much sex. They didn't want to overeat. It was pretty much abstinence was the rule. So when anybody reports that they're having this, wonderful experience, they become frightened. And then, of course, it was picked up on by the great movie Reefer Madness, which was actually about marijuana, but the word narcotic was used back then. This frightens people. Oh, my gosh, you're out of your mind. Then what are you going to do next? You're going to come running through the streets and kill me, or run over me with a car, or rape me, or become a prostitute? And those were the things that people were concerned about.
Well, and didn't you say also that was the drug czar? He created that, right? What was his name?
Yeah, Henry Anslinger. We forget our history. 1930, the government appointed a man by the name of Henry Anslinger to be the narcotic drug czar. At the time, it was the Treasury Department. Elliot Ness was fighting alcohol, and Henry Anslinger was fighting drugs in general. He reigned for 32 years. He was kind of edged out by John Kennedy. He
and
created...
now they want a new one, right?
What's that?
They want to have a new drug czar, don't they?
They want to have a new drug czar, yeah, and you kind of wonder what they're going to do.
Right.
Kind of just stigmatize even more. I mean, we've had 100 years of stigmatizing, and it's always social, it's never medical, stigmatizing of people who take drugs because, 1, they're making bad choices, 2, they're scary, 3, they're violating the rules, 4, they're doing what we tell them not to do. And so then comes the attempts to control.
Fear is always the easiest way to get people to back down from stuff. We have been putting together, by the way, and I would like just everybody to know about this, a new show that we're going to have some panelists on. Do you want to talk about this? And it's going to be about this whole thing.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, it's just going to be people that have substance abuse disorder, right? And we're going to have 4 panelists, including yourself and myself, and another doctor, and then we'll pull in guest panelists once in a while just to switch things up. And we'll be taking questions about addiction. And it's just going to be a real honest and truthful conversation because I know we were talking about it. I think one way to combat all this is that we start educating, especially at a very young age if we can, what's going on and this whole, euphoric state that you get in if you do have the addicted gene. Is that, I don't know, is that what we call it? Or
Yeah, sure. Gene for addiction, yeah, no, that's fine. Because I'll give you an example. One of the people I have spoken with who became a hardcore heroin addict for quite a long time started off at a party at age 14, and he drank some beer, and he had 3 or 4 beers and got a little drunk, but something else happened. He went on a magic carpet ride, and he said his whole life changed right before his eyes. It was this totally wonderful, unbelievable experience. He didn't want to tell anybody because he didn't want anybody interfering with it. Within 3 days, he was looking for hard liquor, and it just became a path to destruction. So wouldn't it be nice in high school if everybody kind of had a little film strip, and said, whoa, this is not the way I'm supposed to feel. And if I do feel like this, I'm in danger, in grave danger. So, but they need to hear, in schools, they need to hear examples. And I'm starting to collect some from people with addiction disease, and they all report this unbelievable experience like the judge did.
Yeah.
So we need to understand this is kind of a weird disease, but, we doctors deal with weird diseases all the time. Read Oliver Sacks' books.
If you have this addictive gene, is it just for, the opioids? It could be anything, right? Or
no, it's just the opioids and alcohol. The other gene for addiction is nicotine. Now, there is the brain people. I just read a couple papers by these brain researchers, and I fell asleep 3 times. It's just real hard to get through these. But what they're thinking currently is there is addiction light, which is overuse of marijuana, cocaine, and amphetamines, such that when you stop taking them, you do not have any physical reactions. But you're still nailed. You're still running around trying to, one guy smoked marijuana daily for 2 years.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. When they say marijuana is the gateway drug to, harder things, so that's not true then?
No, it's not true. People who, if you have somebody in high school who just smokes marijuana and takes cocaine and doesn't take any opiates for 2 years, and then goes to a party in 2 years and takes an opiate, happens to have the gene, they're going to get nailed. Yeah. They're going to have true addiction or addiction deluxe. And addiction deluxe is severe withdrawal symptoms when you stop, cravings that are very serious to the point that you suspend all activities in your life looking for substance. People who take cocaine and marijuana and stuff, they can run around looking for it, but not to this degree. And if a person can't get marijuana, they're okay. Or they can't get their cocaine, they're okay. They're grumpy, and they're kind of psychologically addicted, but they don't do what addiction deluxe does. They don't suspend all life activities to find more substance.
Is there, any tests or anything, or outside things besides that person knowing that they have that?
You can, there's a very strong family history. So doctors can ask people if they have a family history of hardcore alcoholism or addiction, opiate addiction. And there is a new test coming very soon. Don't know the dates yet. They're actually going to have a commercial test for the gene, and that'll settle it. You can go get screened ahead of time. Also, parents can watch their kids. If their kids drink beer at home, or there's a party and they're drinking around their parents. You can tell when somebody's having a magic carpet ride, and you can say, son, come here, I need to talk to you for a minute. And then you always have to do an intervention.
But how do you tell? Because I know, I've had friends that have been like that, and they're really great at hiding it. So how do you know? Except if you admit it.
Yeah, parents can pick up on the stuff. It's different than being drunk. It's almost like it's so wonderful that people sneak off. Hey, what are you doing drinking in your bedroom? That's kind of a tip off. Like they're up there just like, leave me alone. I'm having this sneaking around all of a sudden. Hey, son, where'd you go? We thought you were at the party. So parents need to get their radar up, and then ahead of time, if the kids know that the magic carpet ride is part of the deal, then the discussion becomes easier. Then it becomes, son, do you think you're having a magic carpet ride? How do you feel? Tell me how you feel. Well, Dad, like I'm up in the clouds. People don't feel that way when they're drunk, and so with the dialogue, then people can recognize this.
Well, what if say, younger kids are listening to this and stuff like that. What if, do you think that maybe if we're saying this to them, they would be like, ooh, I want to go and try that? Or do you think it would be more of a, that's interesting, I'm going to have to watch out for that?
Well, Henry Anslinger, back in 1950, they wanted to start an educational program in the New York City schools about drug addiction, and he said, oh my God, don't do that. They'll just all run out and try it. He was wrong. Sex education in schools is, don't tell them that sex is really wonderful. Just kind of, don't say anything.
Right.
And then we had, young women leaving school, kicked out, going off to abortionists and dying, just like people die today out of ignorance.
Right.
If kids knew what was going on and they did an early intervention, and they won't like it, but too bad. You're going to have to go on medicine to prevent this from happening. We're going to need to watch carefully. If you break your leg, I'm going to give you the pills. You're not going to get them yourself. So there's a whole set of things that happens. But this is a rare disease. It's only 4 per 1,000 that will get it. But we deal with rare diseases every day. And there's no reason not to get good at dealing with this particular disease. 996 people out of 1,000 subjected to opiates, including intravenous heroin, will not addict.
So this whole thing that's going on with the C.D.C. and what's going on in the media about the opioid epidemic, so people that are actually addicts hasn't gone up or gone down. It's just what it is naturally, and I don't get that.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, genetic diseases are always the same. Diabetes, in spite of what they say, diabetes stays about the same. People with sickle cell anemia stays about the same. People with other rare inherited diseases, the numbers stay about the same. So the percentage of people with addiction today compared to 1920, compared to the United Kingdom, compared to Portugal, compared to Canada, compared to 1950 and 1970 and 1980, for which I have statistics on, it's all the same. About 4 people per 1,000, about 0.5%. So there's only one explanation for that. As a scientist, it has to be genetic. If we prescribe twice as many opioid pain relievers in the United States than they do in the United Kingdom, we should have twice the addiction they do in the United Kingdom. But we don't. It's the same. So it is not sensitive.
Too, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it is not sensitive to the number of prescriptions.
Mm-hmm.
It's a genetic disease by simple observation. Any high school kid, if you told them that there were the same number of percentage of people with the disease, they're going to just figure that this must be a genetic inherited disease. How could it always be the same? We prescribe all these opiates that you read about in the paper, then we must be having a surging number of people with heroin addiction. Nope. The government has not produced, P.R.O.P has not produced any information that indicates the addictions have increased, except for what I mentioned about people signing up at the addiction clinic, which is ludicrous.
Mm. Dr. Kline, we're going to sign off here for the night, but do you have any last words about the addictions, the GAO, and Medicare?
Well, we're going to be working on that. Medicare is operating off the premise that high doses of drugs cause problems, and they're going to try to restrict them, and we're going to battle that because it is not true.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming in tonight, and we'll be back here again next week for 30 minutes on the Doctor Corner with Dr. Kline and Jonelle Elgaway. And we will also be starting up Con Nation Tuesdays and Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We will be talking about Kratom next week. Have a good night. Thank you.
Been listening to The Doctor's Corner with Dr. Kline and Jonelle Elgaway. Copyright 2018 by EXG LLC. All rights reserved.